coronation truce was sacred, a single day when blood did not stain the galaxy's throne rooms. But Ambassador Threx of the Vian Collective never respected sacred things. He cornered Crown Princess Velara in the Hall of Concord, his guards welding the exits shut. "Your bloodline ends here, Princess, and your frail human pet will watch you die." The cultural attaché, James Cole, stood trembling near a marble pillar, still feigning the clumsy shuffling walk he had used as his disguise for months. Then his eyes shifted, lit from within by a cold, ancient recognition. Beneath the polished floors, a deep planetary scream began to build. James had triggered a failsafe the Utaka buried eons ago, and he would crack the world apart for her. James Cole was not a diplomat. He was a decommissioned weapon buried so deep within human black ops that not even Earth's intelligence apparatus remembered his file. The extinct Utaka civilization had built a planetary-scale failsafe that could crack a world's core using a single resonant neural key, and by accident or design, James carried that key inside his own mind. The Vian Collective thought they were crushing a helpless heir. They never asked why humanity lets its quietest attachés stand so close to the throne. To understand why, you have to go back 5 years, to a black site research station orbiting a dead star beyond the Orion Spur. A team of xenoarchaeologists had finally cracked the Utaka extinction. The Utaka were not merely dead. They had chosen erasure, encoding their final command into the cores of every world they once touched. A resonant neural key, locked to a specific cognitive frequency, could awaken those dormant planet killers. And against all probability, one human subject registered a near-perfect neural match. His name was James Cole. The project designation was Sundial. They ran him through simulations, implants, and psychological conditioning until his mind could interface with the ancient resonance. Then, when the budget ran dry and the ethical boards got nervous, they decommissioned him. Memory wiped, neural dampeners installed, James was quietly buried in the diplomatic corps as a cultural attaché, a harmless ghost sent to Torvani's prime to fade into irrelevance. But Earth's intelligence planners had a longer game. The princess was predictable in her kindness. She always took a shine to the quiet ones, so they placed James right beside her, a sleeper with no memory of the key he still carried. Across the negotiating table, the Vian Collective saw a different board. For 30 years, their war machine had hammered the Torvani's armada. They knew they could take the capital, but it would cost them a generation of soldiers, so they proposed a truce. The coronation of Crown Princess Velara would be a day of peace, a planetary holiday, the shields lowered for the ceremony as a gesture of trust. The Vian ambassador, Threx, a warlord whose scarred face was a map of conquered systems, personally swore the oath. It was a lie. While diplomats smiled for the cameras, Vian cyberoperatives had already deep-planted slicer teams inside the palace. The plan was elegant in its brutality. Seal the Hall of Concord. Execute the royal bloodline. Blame a human extremist. Install a puppet regency by nightfall. No war, just a surgical coup. And no one would suspect the nervous little human attaché standing at the princess's left shoulder, the one who always forgot where the restrooms were and flinched at loud voices. That was James Cole, his hands still trembling from the dampeners that kept his mind both safe and neutered. But there is a flaw in memory wipes. The subconscious remembers what the conscious cannot. In the weeks leading up to the coronation, James began to dream in geometric patterns. He would wake with a metallic taste in his mouth and the overwhelming sense that something beneath his feet was listening. He noticed small inconsistencies: a maintenance drone loitering too long near the throne room, a palace guard whose iris patterns didn't match his identity badge. He filed it as low-grade anxiety. He never connected the dreams to the growing pressure behind his eyes. The morning of the coronation, the sky was a flawless violet. Princess Velara wore the ancestral platinum diadem, its neural filaments woven into her temples to broadcast the ceremony across the system. Ambassador Threx stood in the front row, flanked by warriors in ceremonial armor that concealed active plasma conduits. James, wearing his carefully practiced stumble, took his position near the marble pillar east of the dais. He held a datapad and kept his eyes down. The Vian guard snickered at the frail primate. Then the doors sealed with a deep magnetic thunk, the sound of deadbolts engaging, and James felt something inside his skull unlock. It was not a thought, it was a frequency, a hum that connected his pulse to the planet's molten heart. He knew, with sudden and terrible clarity, that the Vian were about to kill the only person in the galaxy who had ever treated him as more than a broken tool. Threx raised his hand. The warriors dropped their ceremonial pretense. Plasma rifles unfolded from their gauntlets. Your bloodline ends here, princess, and your Terran pet will watch. Velara's eyes found James. There was no fear in them, only a desperate plea for him to run. She still believed he was a helpless civilian. James did not run. He closed his eyes. He reached down into that humming darkness where the sundial protocol slept. The neural dampeners burned out and his mind became a tuning fork for something vast and ancient. The choice was binary. Activate the Utaka failsafe, and every living thing on Torvani's prime would die. Millions of innocents, the princess, the enemy, all of it. Or do nothing, and watch the Vian plunge a quadrant into slavery. He looked at Velara one last time and he chose. Deep beneath the polished marble floor, the ferrocrystalline core of the planet split along fault lines that had been silent for eons. A seismic moan rolled outward in all directions, and the Hall of Concord began to shake itself apart. The marble floor split open like a jaw. A blast of superheated gas and molten ferrocrystal erupted upward, carving a glowing chasm between the Vian warriors and the princess. James Cole stood perfectly still at the epicenter of the earthquake, his eyes now twin points of calcite blue light, his body humming with a resonance that had not vibrated in this galaxy for 100,000 years. The Vian guards who had laughed at him moments earlier were now scrambling backward, their plasma rifles forgotten, their translator modules shrieking incoherent threat assessments. Ambassador Threx, veteran of a dozen planetary conquests, felt a sensation he had not experienced since childhood, primal, gut-wrenching terror. He had studied every weapon in the Coalition arsenal. He had never seen a single human crack a tectonic plate with a thought. Princess Velara stumbled, catching herself on the toppled remains of her own coronation throne. She stared at James, her cultural attaché, the gentle man who had spent months fetching her tea and mispronouncing Torvani honorifics. His face was the same, but the posture was utterly transformed. No tremor, no clumsiness, just the coiled stillness of a predator who had been playing prey for 412 days. "What are you?" she whispered, not in fear, but in awe. James heard her through the roaring chaos. The question unlocked a cascade of memories that the dampeners had buried. He remembered the sundial chamber, the cold bench, the voice of the project director telling him he was humanity's last insurance policy. He remembered the neural key being threaded into his limbic system like a dormant virus. And he remembered the exact words of his final briefing, spoken just before the memory wipe began. If the Vian ever breach the truce, your proximity to royalty will trigger the protocol. You won't know you're a weapon until the moment you become one. The revelation hit him like a second earthquake. He had not chosen this. Earth had. He was not a decommissioned operative who broke his conditioning out of love. He was an engineered doomsday device, and the Vian's betrayal had simply pulled the trigger. But the princess did not know that, and the planet was still dying. Through the shattered wall of the Hall of Concord, the violet sky had turned a sick, sulphurous yellow. Distant screams rose from the city of Torvani's prime, a metropolis of 12 million sentients who had no idea why their world was suddenly tearing itself apart. The coronation broadcast was still active. Every screen in Coalition space was now watching a planetary extinction event unfold live. On Earth, in the subterranean command centers of the intelligence apparatus, analysts were already drafting the narrative. Vian aggression had triggered an ancient alien superweapon. Humanity would lead the rescue effort and emerge as the sector's savior. The fact that their own asset was the detonator would never see daylight. Threx realized the broadcast was still running. He understood the optics instantly. If the Vian were seen fleeing while the planet died, Their alliance with the outer colonies would collapse. But if he could kill the princess and blame the human weapon, the narrative could still be spun. He drew his obsidian ceremonial blade, its edge monomolecular, and lunged toward Velara through the smoke. "You die with your pet, princess." James pivoted without conscious thought. His mind reached into the planetary network that the Utaka had woven into the crust. A dormant fault line beneath the floor snapped upward, a pillar of jagged crystal erupting directly between the ambassador and his target. Threx was hurled backward, his armor crunching against the far wall. James had never used a weapon like this. It was horrifyingly intuitive. He could feel the entire planet as an extension of his own nervous system. Every fault a synapse, every magma chamber a pressure valve, and the cascade was accelerating. At current rate, the mantle would breach the crust in 6 minutes, vaporizing the entire hemisphere. Then the pivot came. From a hidden cranial implant James had never known existed, a voice crackled directly into his auditory nerve. A human voice. "Sundial Actual, this is Atlas Station. Confirm asset activation." James froze. His neural interface recognized the voice. It was the same project director who had ordered his memory wipe. It meant Earth was watching. It meant his activation was not a tragic accident. It meant they had always planned for this exact scenario, and they had not warned him, had not warned anyone. Velara saw the shift in his expression. The cold light in his eyes flickered, replaced by something rawer, betrayal. "James, are you hearing something?" He did not answer. The voice continued. "Asset, you are to ensure the Vian ambassador does not survive this event. The princess is expendable. All civilian casualties will be attributed to Vian weapon testing. Do you copy?" James stared at the princess, her diadem askew, her platinum dress shredded at the hem, her eyes full of desperate trust. Expendable. The word echoed in his skull, colliding with the resonance of the dying planet. He realized with sick clarity that the entire truce of Torvanis had been a chess move, not by the Vian alone, but by human intelligence as well. Both sides had planned to use the coronation as a trap. The Vian intended a coup. Earth intended a staged atrocity that would justify full-scale war. And James Cole, the clumsy attaché who could not even remember his own name, was the matchstick they had lit at both ends. The cascade timer in his mind ticked to 5 minutes. He had a choice. Complete the protocol, let the planet die, and frame the Vian as monsters, giving humanity a moral mandate to wage total war. Or defy his programming, shut down the resonance, and save 12 million lives, but leave Earth exposed and the Vian coup still in motion. Neither path guaranteed the princess's survival, but one path would let her die as a martyr. The other would let her die in his arms while he tried to be something more than a weapon. Threx dragged himself upright, his monomolecular blade still clutched in one trembling claw. He had heard none of the internal transmission, but he saw the hesitation in the human stance. "Whatever demon possessed you," he snarled, "it is failing. The quakes are slowing." James knew it. The resonance was unstable. His neural key was degrading under the strain, its design never meant for prolonged use. In 60 seconds, he would lose the interface entirely. The planet would stabilize, but the fault lines had already been primed. If he let go now, the entire continent would still fracture over the coming hours, a slow-motion apocalypse that no one could stop. The throne room was a crucible of collapsing marble, toxic fumes, and distant screams. And in the brief, charged eye of the storm, Velara stepped forward and placed her palm flat against James's chest, directly over the place where the human heart beats. "Whatever they made you into," she said quietly, "you are still standing between me and the blade. That is enough." For the first time since the sundial protocol ignited his synapses, James felt something that was not a command. It was not a frequency. It was a choice. He made it. He reached into the resonance one last time, not to destroy, but to redirect. He poured the remaining energy into a single focused pulse, a containment wave that would seal the deepest fissure beneath the capital and buy the planet 6 hours of stability. It would burn out the neural key permanently. It would leave the city ravaged but not annihilated, and it would let him reclaim, for however brief a moment, his own free will. He grabbed the princess's arm. We have to get to the subcore access tunnel beneath the palace. If I can reach the Utaka primary conduit before the key burns out, I can trigger a full stabilization. If I fail, this half-measure buys time, but the planet still dies by dawn. Threx bellowed a command, and the surviving Vian warriors regrouped, blocking the only exit. The broadcast was still live. Across the galaxy, billions watched as a single human and a royal heir began their sprint into the collapsing depths of a palace that was rapidly becoming a tomb. And the galaxy had no idea that the real enemy was not the Vian, but the silent voice from Atlas Station, now whispering override codes into a weapon that had just remembered how to say no. The subcore access tunnel was not built by human hands, or Vian, or even Torvani. It was Utaka, carved from obsidian glass that glowed faintly green in the seismic strobes of a dying world. James and Velara plunged downward, the walls shuddering, the air thick with ionized dust and the synthetic voice of Atlas Station repeating override commands directly into his skull. Sundial Actual, stand down. Your stabilization attempt is unauthorized. Cease all autonomous action or we will trigger neural termination. James stumbled, clutching his temple. The voice was not a suggestion. It was a kill switch. He could feel it coiling in his brainstem, a worm of code that would sever his motor functions and let the resonance collapse entirely. But he kept moving because if he stopped, Velara stopped. And if she stopped, she died. And that was the one outcome his conditioning had never accounted for. Velara pulled him forward, her coronation gown now a tattered rag, her bare feet cut on ancient glass. You are not just a weapon, she said between gasps. I know what Sundial is. I know what Earth did to you. James nearly fell. The princess had known. For months, through every shared cup of tea and every gentle correction of his Torvani grammar, she had been watching the man who was built to end her world. And she had not turned him in. She had tried to deprogram him, one kindness at a time. Our intelligence intercepted the project files 2 years ago, she said. I requested you specifically. I thought if you were near someone who saw you as human, the trigger might never fire. I failed. You did not fail, James said, his voice ragged. You made me hesitate. You made me remember I had a name. Then the tunnel opened into a vast chamber, and the scale of the disaster became fully visible. The Utaka primary conduit was not a machine. It was a cathedral of living crystal, a vertical shaft of pure resonance energy that plunged from the planetary crust directly into the ferrocrystalline core. It pulsed with a rhythm that matched the human heartbeat. And it was already failing. A latticework of hairline fractures spiderwebbed up its surface, each one bleeding a sound so low it vibrated in the teeth. James recognized the damage. The Vian had gotten here first. The Slicer team was already in the chamber, a dozen commandos in matte black stealth armor, their equipment spread around the base of the conduit. They were not trying to destroy it. They were amplifying the resonance. The Vian wanted the planet to crack. They had planned this as a fallback. If the coup failed, the core would detonate anyway, and the Vian narrative would paint humanity as the aggressors who had triggered an ancient superweapon. Both sides were running the exact same play. The lead Vian operative, a tall figure with surgically grafted psionic dampeners, turned as they entered. The human weapon, it hissed through a translator. We detected your activation. We assumed you would complete the cascade, but you are trying to stop it. That is unexpected. Velara stepped in front of James, shielding him with her own body. You are standing in the heart of my world. You will not take it, the operative laughed. We do not need to take it, princess. The cascade is self-sustaining now. Your human weapon merely struck the match. We are simply making sure it burns. James felt the resonance surge. The conduit was a wound and the Vian were holding it open. If he could reach the base and interface directly, he might be able to reverse the amplification. But the override voice from Atlas was screaming now, drowning out his thoughts. Neural termination in 60 seconds. Comply or be neutralized. He fell to his knees, blood trickling from his nose. Velara knelt beside him, her hands cradling his face. Listen to me. Not the voice, not the code. You are James Cole. The Utaka did not build a weapon. They built a lock. And locks can be turned both ways. That was the moment the conduit spoke back. A voice that was not Atlas, not Vian, not anything that had evolved under a star. a chorus of a billion long-dead minds stirring from their eons-long sleep inside the planet's core. The Utaka were not extinct. They were dormant. The resonance was not a bomb. It was a key to wake them, and James was not a detonator. He was a door. The Vian operative recoiled, its dampeners sparking uselessly. The Atlas voice choked into static. And deep in the crystal shaft, a light began to grow that had not shone since the galaxy was young. The Utaka were rising, and every world killer across every dead planet in the galaxy was beginning to hum in sympathetic resonance. The wait, it gets worse moment was not that James would destroy Torvani's prime. It was that saving it would unleash an ancient intelligence upon a galaxy that had forgotten how to kneel. The choice he faced now was not between princess and planet. It was between the species he had been built to serve and the species that had built the builders, and the clock on every habitable world in the sector was ticking. The Utaka voice filled the chamber like water filling a lung. It spoke in no language, yet every mind in that cathedral of crystal understood it perfectly. You have turned the key, sundial. Now the door opens. James felt his body become a conduit for something infinitely larger than himself. The fractures in the crystal shaft sealed. The hyper-accelerated resonance that the Vian slicers had so carefully amplified reversed its polarity, and the planet's ferrocrystalline core, moments from detonation, exhaled a long, shuddering sigh of stabilization. The Vian commandos tried to fire, but their weapons would not obey. The Utaka had rewritten the physics of the chamber. Princess Velara stood at the center of the light, her torn gown now luminous, her eyes reflecting the billion-year-old intelligence that had just awakened. She was not a passenger in this. The Torvani royal bloodline was not random, it was deliberate, a custodial lineage that the Utaka had preserved for this exact moment. You are the guardian, the Utaka told her. You kept the key safe until it could choose. The key was James, and he had chosen, not destruction, not compliance. He had chosen her. The Atlas override screamed one final time, a kill command that would sever James's brainstem from his body. The Utaka caught the signal in the air like a thrown stone and dissolved it. Tell your masters, the ancient voice said, broadcasting directly to the intelligence headquarters on Earth, that the children of Utaka do not kill their messengers. The broadcast was still live across the entire coalition. Every human, every Torvani, every Vian, every sentient in 100 star systems saw the moment when an ancient alien intelligence forgave the species that had tried to weaponize its legacy. Ambassador Threx, still alive in the ruined Hall of Concord, watched on his personal feed as the planet's quake ceased and the Utaka light rose from the conduit like a second sun. He knew his gambit was over. He dropped his blade and knelt, not in surrender to the princess, but in something closer to religious terror. The Vian Armada, waiting in dark space, received the same broadcast. Their high command, realizing they had been played by their own ambition and by human machination, retreated from the system without a single shot fired. James Cole collapsed against the base of the conduit, his neural key completely burned out, his body emptied of the resonance that had defined his secret life. He was, for the first time since the Sundial Project had carved him open, just a man. Velara knelt beside him, pulling his head into her lap. You are not a weapon, she whispered. You never were. You are the lock that kept the galaxy safe until it was ready to wake. He smiled weakly. So I'm a very tired lock. She laughed through tears that splashed onto his face. The Utaka presence began to recede, not vanishing but settling back into the core, a watchful sentinel that would now stand guard over Torvani's prime and by extension every world that hosted its ancient network. But before it withdrew fully, it left one final message. There are others like you, James Cole. Scattered across the galaxy, dormant keys waiting for the right moment. Some will choose destruction. Some will choose protection. Humanity's future will be decided by the choices of its hidden children. You are the first. You will not be the last. The revelation struck the intelligence agencies of every civilization like a hammer blow. Earth's clandestine sundial program was exposed for what it was, a desperate attempt to exploit a legacy they barely understood. Within hours, the coalition launched investigations, arrests, and a global reckoning over the ethics of human weaponization. General Wright, the traitor in the original story, was not the only one with blood on his hands. The architects of the Sundial Protocol were named, shamed, and prosecuted, not by a military tribunal, but by a civilian oversight board led by Princess Velara herself, who had emerged from the catacombs not as a fragile heir, but as the galaxy's most important diplomat. The final surprise came 3 days later, when the Utaka left one more gift. In the subcore chamber, where the conduit now stood permanently stabilized, a single crystalline tablet emerged from the wall. Contained a star chart pointing to a system on the far edge of the local group where the Utaka had first evolved. And a message, "When you are ready, come home." It was not a command, it was an invitation. The Utaka were not just sleeping guardians, they were ancestors, and they had been waiting for their children to grow up. James Cole and Princess Velara stood together in the quiet of that chamber, the weight of 100,000 years settling around them. He took her hand. "So what do we do now?" She smiled, that same fierce, indomitable smile that had survived an assassination attempt and a planetary collapse. "We do what we were made to do. We protect. We guide. We build something better. And if the galaxy doesn't like it," she added with a glint of iron in her eyes, "they can take it up with the Utaka." The galaxy had watched a quiet human crack a planet open and then, impossibly, stitch it back together. James Cole was no longer a weapon, no longer a sleeper, no longer a forgotten tool of a shadow program. He was the first of a new kind, someone who had stood at the crossroads of destruction and mercy and chosen not to kneel to either. The Utaka had called him the first, not the last. Somewhere out there, scattered across the stars, other hidden keys are stirring, their minds dormant, their potential catastrophic or salvific depending on the choices they will one day face. The galaxy now knows the truth. Beneath the politics of empires and the calculations of spy masters, older intelligences are waking and they are watching how their children behave. The invitation stands. When you are ready, come home. That is not a destination. It is a test. And the question the Utaka left hanging in that glowing subcore chamber was not if humanity would answer it, but who would lead the way? The architects of Sundial, or the princess who refused to call a broken man anything but human? If this epic of ancient aliens, hidden identities, and a love fierce enough to crack a planet's core kept you on the edge of your seat, then smash that like button, share it with your fellow sci-fi fans, and subscribe to join us on more journeys through the impossible. Until next time, keep watching the quiet ones. They might just be holding the keys to everything.